My family threw me out the day after my father died. They didn't know he had left me one thing that would destroy every lie they'd built. If you think losing your father is the worst pain you'll ever feel, try burying him on Saturday and getting thrown out of your childhood. Home on Sunday morning, not asked to leave, not politely, thrown out. My suitcase landed in the wet grass before I even understood what was happening. My older brother looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Dad's gone. You don't belong here anymore." I remember staring at him, wondering if grief had broken his mind, or mine, because just 48 hours earlier, we were standing side by side in the hospital watching our father take his last breath. Now I was standing on the driveway with nowhere to go. What they didn't know, what absolutely nobody in my family knew, was that my father had spent the last 6 months secretly preparing for exactly this moment. My name is Arthur Vale. I'm 45 years old, and everything I'm about to tell you really changed the way I see family forever. People always assume that families like mine looked perfect from the outside. Nice house, middle-class neighborhood outside Cleveland. Christmas dinners, family barbecues, vacation photos. We looked like the kind of people who smiled in holiday commercials. Reality was different. My mother died when I was 12. Cancer. Fast. Cruel. After that, Dad changed. Not into a bad father. Just quieter one. He worked longer hours. He stopped laughing. He forgot birthdays. He forgot anniversaries. Sometimes he'd stare through the living room window for an hour without saying a word. But he never stopped providing. He worked construction his whole life. Hard hands, bad knees, permanent back pain. He built houses for strangers while ours slowly fell apart from the inside. I was the youngest. My brother, Daniel, was 5 years older. My sister, Melissa, was 3 years older. Growing up, they were always close. Same friends, same schools, same jokes. I was different. I liked books, old movies, fixing broken radios, spending weekends helping Dad in the garage. Dad never said I was his favorite. He wasn't that kind of man. But people notice little things. Who gets invited fishing? Who gets asked for help? Who Dad trusted with his tools? Who knew where every important document was? Daniel noticed. Melissa noticed. Even their spouses noticed. It became one of those silent resentments nobody admitted out loud. When I turned 23, I left Ohio. Not because I wanted adventure, because staying meant becoming part of endless family arguments. Daniel thought Dad owed him money. Melissa believed she deserved the house because she had children. Every Thanksgiving somehow turned into a discussion about inheritance. While Dad was still alive, it disgusted me. So I moved to Colorado, started over, worked as an electrician, eventually opened a small repair business. Nothing glamorous, but honest. I got married. That lasted 9 years. Then divorce. No children. Just me and work. Meanwhile, Daniel stayed close to Dad. Mostly because Dad kept helping him financially. New truck? Dad helped. Business loan? Dad helped. Mortgage payment? Dad helped. Melissa wasn't much different. She visited whenever she needed babysitting, or money, or someone to fix something. Dad never complained. At least not to them. He complained to me. Late-night phone calls became our routine. He'd say, "Arthur, don't tell your brother I called." Then we'd talk for 2 hours. About baseball, politics, the weather, sometimes about loneliness. I think that's what hurt him most. Not old age, not bad health. Feeling useful only when someone wanted something. 6 months before he died, something changed. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon. His voice sounded smaller. "I need you to come home." I asked if everything was okay. He said yes too quickly, then added, "Please." I hadn't heard that word from him in years. Please. So I flew home that weekend. The house looked older. The paint peeling, the porch sagging. Dad looked even older. He'd lost weight. His hands shook slightly while pouring coffee. "You seeing a doctor?" I asked. He smiled. "I'm 76, Arthur. Doctors see me more than I see myself. Then he laughed. I laughed too, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. That evening he asked me to help organize boxes in the attic. We spent 4 hours sorting old photographs, mom's letters, childhood drawings, military papers from grandpa. Nothing unusual, until everyone else left. Dad closed the attic door, locked it, then reached behind an old cabinet and pulled out a small metal box. I've been waiting to show you this. Inside were documents, property records, bank statements, insurance papers, a leather notebook. He watched my face carefully. I don't trust them. I frowned. Who? He didn't answer immediately, then quietly said, your brother and sister. That sentence hit harder than I expected. Not because I disagreed, because hearing a father say it about his own children felt wrong. He sighed deeply. They've been asking questions. What kind of questions? About my accounts. About the house. About my will. He rubbed his temples. I think they're planning for my funeral before I'm even dead. I wanted to tell him he was imagining things. Instead, I stayed silent, because I'd noticed it too. Daniel had recently asked me if Dad still owned some rental property. Melissa had casually mentioned how expensive nursing homes were. Neither question sounded innocent anymore. Dad looked directly at me. If something happens. No. Arthur. No. If something happens. Promise me you'll listen before you trust anyone. Those words stayed with me. I wish I'd understood why he said them. Over the next few months, I visited 3 more times. Each visit felt heavier. Dad tired more easily. He forgot names. Sometimes repeated stories. But mentally, he was still sharp. One afternoon, we were sitting on the porch watching rain fall across the yard. He suddenly asked, do you remember the oak tree? I laughed. The one I fell out of? You broke your arm. You blamed the ladder. I blamed the ladder because your mother would have blamed me. We both laughed. Then he became serious. That tree taught me something. What? You can tell a tree is rotten long before it falls. I looked at him. He wasn't talking about trees anymore. 3 weeks later, the hospital called. Massive stroke. I made the first flight I could. When I arrived, Daniel and Melissa were already there. They hugged me, cried. For a few hours, it actually felt like we were a family again. Dad never woke up. He passed away early Friday morning. Peacefully. At least that's what the nurse said. I hope she was right. The funeral happened the next day. It rained. Of course it rained. People I'd never met told me what a wonderful man my father had been. Construction workers, neighbors, old fishing buddies. A retired mailman hugged me and cried harder than anyone in my family. That told me everything. After everyone left the cemetery, Daniel suggested we all meet back at Dad's house. Family only. I thought he wanted to remember Dad together. I was wrong. The second we walked inside, his wife locked the front door. Melissa sat at the dining table with a folder already waiting. Daniel cleared his throat. We need to discuss the future. Our future? I asked. No. He looked around the room. The property's future. I stared at him. We buried Dad 2 hours ago. Exactly. Exactly. That single word made my stomach turn. Melissa opened the folder. There are practical matters. Bills, assets, ownership, the house, vehicles, investments. She had spreadsheets. Spreadsheets. Prepared before the funeral. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Daniel leaned forward. You've been gone 20 years, Arthur. I visited. You left. I built a life. You abandoned responsibility. I blinked. What responsibility? Dad. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. I talked to him almost every week. Phone calls don't count. I flew here every few months. You weren't here. Neither of us raised our voices. Somehow, that made everything worse. Then Daniel said the sentence that changed everything. We think it's best if you leave tomorrow. I looked from him to Melissa, waiting for someone to smile. Nobody did. I grew up here. Melissa folded her arms. You don't live here. I'm staying until after probate. Daniel shook his head. No. I'll sleep in my old room. No. Why? His answer came without hesitation. Because this house belongs to us now. I opened my mouth to remind him that nothing had been settled legally, but before I could speak, Melissa quietly slid another document across the table. I think you should read this. I looked down. It wasn't the will. It wasn't a deed. It was something far more disturbing. And the moment I read the first line, I realized my father's warning had been far more serious than I ever imagined. I stared at the document for several long seconds. At first, I thought I was misunderstanding it. Then I read it again and again. At the top, in bold letters, it read, Statement of care expenses below. It was a neatly organized spreadsheet. Medical bills, home maintenance, medication, transportation, groceries, property taxes, repairs, professional caregivers. Every expense supposedly made over the last 8 years. At the very bottom, one number caught my eye, $183,417.82, and underneath it, one sentence. This amount should be deducted from Arthur Vale's share of the estate due to his prolonged absence and failure to contribute to the care of John Vale. I slowly looked up. What is this? Daniel folded his arms. It's exactly what it looks like. No. I slid the papers back toward him. It isn't. Melissa leaned forward. It cost money to take care of Dad. I know. So we paid. I'm sure you paid for some things. Daniel interrupted. Most things. I shook my head. No. You don't know that. I know Dad. Silence. You don't prepare a document like this before the funeral unless you've been planning it. Neither of them answered. That silence told me more than words ever could. I stood up. I'm not signing anything. Daniel remained seated. You haven't even read everything. I've read enough. You owe us. That sentence almost made me laugh. Owe you. For 8 years. I called him every week. Phone calls aren't care. I flew here 3 or 4 times a year. I stayed whenever he needed me. You left. I built my own life. You abandoned this family. I stared at him. It was unbelievable. The same brother who borrowed thousands from our father over the years was accusing me of abandoning him. Melissa finally spoke. We're trying to avoid lawyers. I smiled for the first time all day. Funny. What's funny? You already have one. Neither of them denied it. That confirmed my suspicion. This wasn't grief. This wasn't panic. This had been planned. Long before Dad died. That night I couldn't sleep. Every room in the house felt different. The silence was heavier, almost unnatural. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps. Soft, careful. Someone trying not to wake anyone else. I opened my bedroom door just enough to peek outside. Daniel. He was holding a flashlight. Instead of going toward his bedroom, he quietly walked downstairs. Something about the way he moved immediately caught my attention. He wasn't wandering. He knew exactly where he was going. I waited about 30 seconds before following him. The light from his flashlight leaked through the cracked door of Dad's study. I stopped outside. Inside, papers were scattered everywhere. Desk drawers pulled completely out. Cabinets left open. Photo albums lying on the floor. Daniel wasn't browsing. He was searching. Frantically, I heard him whisper under his breath. Come on. A few seconds later, Melissa walked into the room. You find it? No. It has to be here. It isn't. What if he moved it? Daniel slammed a drawer shut. He wouldn't. You don't know that. I know Dad. I almost walked into the room right then. Instead, I stayed perfectly still. Melissa lowered her voice. We need to find it before Monday. If Reeves has it. He said he didn't. Daniel cursed quietly. No. Dad wouldn't leave it with him. Leave what? What exactly were they so desperate to find? The next morning, nobody mentioned the previous night. Daniel drank coffee while reading the newspaper. Melissa made scrambled eggs. It almost looked normal, as if neither of them had spent half the night tearing apart our father's office. I decided not to say a word. Sometimes silence makes people reveal more than confrontation ever will. Around 10 o'clock, I drove into town. There was one person I needed to see, Michael Reeves, Dad's attorney. He'd handled almost every legal document our family had signed for the last 30 years. When I walked into his office, his receptionist recognized me immediately. Arthur. I nodded. I need to speak with Mr. Reeves. She looked toward his office. I'll let him know. Less than a minute later, the door opened. Michael himself stepped into the lobby. He looked older than I remembered. More gray hair, thinner, but the same calm expression. I'm sorry about your father. Thank you. He motioned toward his office. Come in. His office hadn't changed much. Shelves packed with law books, old framed certificates, a baseball signed by someone I never recognized. After we sat down, he looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. I've been waiting for you. I frowned. For me? Yes. Why? Without answering, he opened one of his desk drawers, carefully removed a sealed envelope, and placed it in front of me. Across the front, written in my father's unmistakable handwriting, were 3 words, Arthur. Only Arthur. For several seconds, I couldn't move. When did he leave this? 3 months ago. Why didn't you mail it? Because he specifically instructed me not to. When was I supposed to receive it? Michael folded his hands together. Only after the funeral. I looked back at the envelope. He knew. Michael sighed. I think he suspected. Suspected what? He hesitated, then answered quietly. That things would become unpleasant. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. Inside, there was a handwritten letter and a small silver key, stamped with one number. 214. I looked at the key first. What is this? Michael answered immediately. A safe deposit box. I looked back at him. Dad rented one? Yes. I've never heard about it. Neither had I until recently. You didn't arrange it? No. He intentionally used a different bank. That surprised me. Dad trusted Michael with almost everything. If he'd gone somewhere else, he wanted absolute secrecy. I unfolded the letter. The first sentence instantly made my stomach tighten. Arthur, if you're reading this, then they've already started lying. I stopped breathing for a second. I continued reading. Don't argue with them. Don't accuse anyone. Don't show this letter to your brother or your sister. Go to the safe deposit box first. Then, one final sentence. One that haunted me immediately. I'm sorry that I had to test my own children. I read it again and again. Test my own children? What had Dad done? What had he discovered? Michael remained completely silent while I finished reading. Finally, I asked, when is the reading of the will? Monday morning. Can you tell me what's in it? I'm afraid I legally can't. Not even a hint? He smiled sadly. Your father expected questions. So that's a no. I'm sorry. I stood up to leave. Just before I reached the door, Michael spoke again. Arthur. I turned around. In 32 years of practicing law, I've never seen your father as frightened as he was during the last few months. Instead of driving back to the house, I drove straight to the bank. It wasn't one I'd ever seen Dad use before. Small building, quiet lobby. Only 2 employees. I handed the receptionist the key. She checked my ID, asked for the death certificate, made 2 phone calls, then smiled politely. Please follow me. She led me through 2 heavy steel security doors into the vault. Rows and rows of safe deposit boxes lined the walls. She stopped in front of box 214, inserted the bank's master key, turned it, then stepped away. You may take as much time as you need. For a moment, I simply stared at the tiny lock. Dad had wanted me to come here before anything else. Whatever was inside, he considered more important than his own will. I slid my key into the lock, turned it slowly. The box clicked open. I carefully pulled out the metal drawer. There were only 3 items inside. A thick brown envelope, an old flip phone with its charger, and a USB flash drive. Nothing else. No cash. No jewelry. No deeds. Just those 3 things. My eyes immediately landed on the handwriting across the envelope. Open this only if they try to take everything. A cold chill ran down my spine, because after everything that had happened over the last 48 hours, I already knew that was exactly what they were trying to do. For nearly a full minute, I just sat there staring at the envelope. The bank vault was completely silent. No ticking clock. No voices. Just the faint hum of the ventilation system. My father had hidden these things from everyone. Even his own attorney. That wasn't something a paranoid old man did. That was something a man did after he had a reason. I finally broke the seal. Inside was a stack of documents, a second handwritten letter, and a small notebook I recognized immediately. Dad's journal. He had carried it everywhere for years. I'd always assumed it contained grocery lists or reminders. I was wrong. The second letter began differently. There was no greeting, just one sentence. If you've opened this, then I was right. I swallowed hard and kept reading. Arthur, I pray every day that I'm wrong. I hope Daniel and Melissa surprise me. I hope they remember that family matters more than money. But if you're reading this, then they didn't. Which means you need to know everything. My heartbeat sped up. Everything? Dad explained that almost a year earlier, someone had withdrawn nearly $48,000 from one of his savings accounts. At first, he'd assumed the bank had made a mistake. They hadn't. The withdrawals were legitimate. Someone had access to his account. When he confronted Daniel, his brother claimed Dad had simply forgotten authorizing the transfers. When he confronted Melissa, she insisted Daniel was only helping organize finances. Dad hadn't believed either of them. Instead of accusing them, he did something else. He stayed quiet, and he started watching. The journal contained dates, times, phone calls, conversations, every loan, every favor, every excuse. It wasn't written with anger. It was written with sadness. One page caught my attention. March 18th, Daniel asked if I'd updated my will again. Didn't ask how my doctor's appointment went. Didn't ask if I was feeling better. Only asked about the will. Another page. April 9th, Melissa says I should sell the rental property. Claims it'll make life easier. Didn't realize she already had a buyer lined up. Another. June 2nd. They argued in my kitchen for 40 minutes. Thought I couldn't hear them. They were dividing my belongings before I was dead. I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking. Toward the back of the journal, Dad's handwriting became less steady. His health was clearly declining, but his thoughts remained sharp. One page had been underlined 3 different times. The saddest part isn't that they're waiting for me to die. It's that they stopped seeing me while I was still alive. I closed the notebook. For a long time, I simply stared at the floor. The flip phone suddenly made sense. I plugged it into the charger the bank employee had provided. After a few moments, the screen lit up. Only one contact existed. Arthur, nothing else. No messages. No call history. Just one icon. Voice recordings. There were 17 files, each named by date. I pressed the first one. Dad's voice filled the tiny speaker. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this, but today Daniel came over asking where I keep the house deed. He laughed. Not because anything was funny, because disappointment sometimes sounds like laughter. I told him I forgot. Truth is, I moved it weeks ago. The recording ended. I played another. I heard Melissa on the phone today. A pause. She thinks I'm sleeping more than I actually am. Another pause. She said, once he's gone, Arthur won't know anything. I guess she forgot old men still have ears. I froze. My sister had actually said that. The recordings became harder to listen to, not because they contained shocking secrets, because they contained loneliness. A loneliness I'd never fully understood while Dad was alive. One recording was only 30 seconds long. I'm making chili tonight. A long silence. I made enough for 4 people. Another silence. I guess I'll freeze the rest. That one nearly broke me. I sat there until the bank employee gently knocked on the vault door. Sir. I looked up. We're closing in 15 minutes. I hadn't realized I'd spent nearly 3 hours inside. I packed everything back into the envelope, except the journal. That stayed in my hands. Before leaving, I noticed one final document folded inside the envelope. It wasn't handwritten. It was printed. The title read, Private Investigator Report. I blinked. Dad had hired a private investigator? The report summarized 6 months of surveillance. Nothing illegal, just observations, visits, financial activity, property records, phone records that had been legally obtained through Dad's own accounts. Near the end, one paragraph was highlighted. Evidence strongly suggests Daniel Vale and Melissa Carter have repeatedly discussed transferring ownership of the residence before Mr. John Vale's death by convincing him he had previously agreed to updated estate documents. I read that sentence 3 times. They had tried to trick him into signing away his own house. I drove back to Dad's home just before sunset. Neither Daniel nor Melissa was there. Their cars were gone. For the first time since the funeral, the house was quiet. I walked straight into Dad's study. The room was still a mess from the previous night. Drawers open, files scattered everywhere. I slowly began putting everything back where it belonged, mostly because it felt like something Dad would have wanted. As I slid the bottom drawer closed, I noticed something odd. It didn't sit flush. There was resistance. I pulled it back out, reached underneath. My fingers touched tape. Carefully, I peeled away a small envelope taped beneath the drawer. It was yellow with age. On the front, only one word, Arthur again. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. Dad, Mom, me, Daniel, Melissa, taken in our backyard sometime around 1988. On the back, Dad had written, "This was the last summer before money started changing people." Tucked behind the photo was a tiny brass key, smaller than a house key, larger than a mailbox key. No label, no explanation, just the key. What did it open? I had no idea. I barely had time to think before I heard the front door slam. Voices. Daniel, Melissa, they were back. I slipped the envelope into my jacket just as Daniel entered the study. He looked irritated. "Where have you been?" "Out." "Doing what?" "Thinking." His eyes scanned the room, then narrowed. "Were you going through Dad's desk?" I looked around at the mess. "You mean the desk someone else already went through?" For the first time, his confidence cracked. Only for a second, but I saw it. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No?" I stepped closer. "Funny, because someone searched this room around 2 in the morning." Melissa's face turned pale. Daniel recovered quickly. "You spying on us now?" I couldn't sleep. "You should have stayed in your room." That was an interesting choice of words. Not, "You imagined it." Not, "We were looking for paperwork." Instead, "You should have stayed in your room." Dinner that night was painfully quiet. Nobody spoke much. Every now and then, I'd catch Daniel watching me. Not angrily, nervously, almost like he was trying to figure out whether I knew something. He was right to worry, because now, I knew far more than he realized. The next morning was Monday, the reading of the will. At exactly 9 o'clock, the 3 of us walked into Michael Reeves' office. None of us spoke during the drive. The tension was almost physical. Michael greeted us politely, then invited us into the conference room. A thick folder sat on the table. Daniel smiled for the first time all weekend. Melissa looked equally confident. Whatever they believed was in that will, they were certain they had already won. Michael adjusted his glasses, opened the folder. looked at all three of us, then quietly said, "Before I read your father's final wishes, there is one instruction he specifically required me to follow." Daniel frowned. "What instruction?" Michael reached beneath the table, lifted a medium-sized cardboard box onto the conference table. It was sealed with brown packing tape. Across the top, written in my father's handwriting, were 7 words that instantly drained the color from my brother's face. "Open this in front of all 3 children." Daniel didn't move, not at first. He just stared at the box like it had spoken to him. Melissa leaned forward slightly. "What is that supposed to mean?" Michael Reeves calmly placed his hands on the folder in front of him. "I don't know." Daniel let out a short laugh. "That's ridiculous. Dad didn't leave some mystery box like a movie." Michael didn't respond. He simply looked at me, and that look told me everything. He knew this wasn't just paperwork. The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds before Daniel finally spoke again. "Just read the will." Michael nodded once. "I will. But first, your father left very specific instructions." He tapped the box. "This must be opened in front of all 3 of you." Melissa frowned. "Why?" Michael shrugged slightly. "He didn't say." Daniel exhaled sharply. "This is nonsense." He reached forward and tore the tape open. Fast. Angry. Like he wanted to prove there was nothing inside that mattered. The lid opened. And everything changed. Inside the box was not money. Not documents. Not property deeds. It was a second box. Smaller. Locked. And on top of it, a folded sheet of paper. Daniel froze. Melissa's face tightened. I reached for the paper first. My father's handwriting again. But this time, it was different. More direct. Less patient. I read it out loud. "If you are all standing here together, then I was right." Daniel muttered. "What the hell?" I continued. "I tried to believe none of you would become what I suspected. But I needed proof." The room went completely still. Michael didn't interrupt. He already knew what was coming. The letter continued. "I did not become successful in life by trusting hope. I became successful by trusting patterns. And the pattern I saw in my own children terrified me." Melissa whispered, "Dad wouldn't say that, but he already had." I kept reading. "The contents of this box are not about money. They are about truth." Daniel scoffed. "Truth? This is emotional manipulation from beyond the grave." But his voice wasn't steady anymore. Not like before. Inside the smaller locked box was a USB drive. Michael slid it across the table. "This was also included in the instructions." Daniel shook his head. "No, absolutely not. This is insane." Melissa looked at him. "Just open it." I said no. For the first time, he sounded unsure. I took the USB drive, plugged it into Michael's laptop. The folder opened immediately. Only one video file, labeled "Play in front of them." I clicked it. The screen flickered. And then, my father appeared. Alive. Weak, but very much alive. The room went completely silent. Melissa gasped. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Dad sat in what looked like his bedroom. Camera slightly tilted. Hands folded. He looked straight into the lens. And said, "If you're watching this, then I am gone." Daniel whispered. "No," Dad continued. "I want you to understand something clearly. This is not a message of anger. It is a message of confirmation." A pause. "I needed to know who you were when I could no longer influence you." Melissa's eyes filled instantly, but she didn't speak. Nobody did. Dad continued. "I began changing small things in my financial records over a year ago. I told each of you different versions of my situation. I created opportunities. Situations where honesty would matter more than inheritance." My stomach tightened. He had tested them. On purpose. The video continued. "I told Daniel I was reconsidering the will. I told Melissa I was restructuring assets. I watched carefully what each of you did next." A long pause. Then he added, And I documented everything. Daniel suddenly stood up. This is illegal. This is insane. Michael calmly said, sit down. But Daniel didn't. His breathing was heavier now. The video continued. I wish I could say I was surprised. But I wasn't. A long pause. Then the words that hit like a hammer. When I told each of you I might die sooner than expected, you didn't ask how I felt. You asked what you would get. Melissa broke down crying instantly. But Dad wasn't finished. I want to be clear. This house, the accounts, and everything I built are not rewards. They are consequences. A pause. And consequences are earned. Daniel whispered again. This can't be real. But it was. It was too detailed, too precise, too controlled. Dad leaned slightly closer to the camera. And Arthur. My name hit the room like a shockwave. Daniel turned slowly toward me. Melissa did too. Dad continued. If you are there with them, then you already know. I chose you for a reason. I felt my chest tighten. Dad knew I would be the one left standing here. The video ended. Silence filled the room so completely it felt physical. Michael finally spoke. There is one final instruction. He opened the will and began reading. The estate of John Vale shall be distributed as follows. Daniel straightened immediately. Melissa wiped her face. Hope returned for both of them in the same instant. Then Michael continued. To my son Daniel Vale. Daniel exhaled. I leave forgiveness for every mistake he will eventually understand. His face froze. And nothing else of material value. Melissa's breath caught. Michael continued. To my daughter Melissa Carter. Her hands tightened. I leave the same forgiveness. Pause. And nothing else of material value. The room exploded into silence. Daniel whispered. No, that's not possible. Melissa stared at the table, as if waiting for it to change. Michael turned the page. To my son Arthur Vale. My heart stopped. Daniel looked at me instantly. Melissa too. Michael read the final line. I leave everything. A pause. The house. The accounts. The land. The business holdings. And the truth I spent my final year protecting. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. That's bullshit. Michael didn't react. It is legally binding. Melissa whispered. Why him? I didn't answer, because I already knew. Michael closed the folder. Your father also left a final message. He looked at me directly. Specifically for you. He handed me a sealed letter. My name written across it. Again. Arthur. Only Arthur. I opened it. The final message was short. Only 3 lines. You didn't inherit money. You inherited responsibility. Now choose what kind of man carries it. I looked up. Daniel was already walking out. Melissa was still crying. Michael quietly packed the documents. And I sat there holding everything my father had left behind. Not just property. Not just assets. But a decision I never asked for. A decision that would define everything after him. And for the first time since his death, I understood what he meant. When he said he needed to test his own children, he wasn't protecting his wealth. He was protecting his legacy from becoming a weapon. I walked out of the office alone. The air outside felt different, heavier somehow. And I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of mine.